What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, I wanted to try hard and reach Veteran in the Ultra League. This is a very hard thing to do this early on in the season. Getting Veteran at this point is basically like reaching Legend when people are first reaching it here in a couple of weeks. So it's a very hard thing to do, and I am going to try hard as much as I can with this Lapras, Shadow Drapion, and Shadow Dusknoir team. So let's get into the battles and see what this team can do. Alright, let's get into the first game of the night here. We're going to see Lapras up against a Zygarde in the lead. Now, this matchup, when you don't have Ice Beam, is not the best for Lapras, but because we are running Ice Beam on this particular variant, we should get a massive amount of damage if they opt to let this move through. I'm going to throw the Ice Beam. Do they respect it, or do they expect me to have Skull Bash as my secondary move? Ice Beam being thrown gets no shielded. Zygarde, though, being the bulky monster that it is, still survives the attack. They bank a lot of energy, and they swap into Shadow for Alligator. I'm still very happy to get all of that damage into Zygarde, because that is such a tricky Pokemon for our backline, especially with Earthquake or Crunch. It could be very bad for either Shadow Dusknoir or Shadow Drapion. With that said, Shadow for Alligator is not the worst thing for Lapras to see here. Despite not having Skull Bash, we can go for Psywave damage, and even Sparkling Arias are going to do quite a bit of damage to them here. We throw the move, it does end up getting a shield, and at this point, they're going to throw another charge attack if they want to knock us out. They have shown that they are on Crunch, which is a little bit annoying right now. It means that Dusknoir would take a super effective charge attack of energy if they opt to throw it against us, but instead I'm going to think if we can farm down all the way with our Shadow Drapion, this might not be the worst spot to be in. Shield up right now, Hydro Cannon would do quite a bit of damage, and if I ever see them come in with that Zygarde, I can go instantly for an Aqua Tail, snipe down all of this energy that they have, or potentially draw a shield from them right now. Aqua Tail does end up drawing a shield from them. They throw instantly after the fact, and I'm thinking I could shield this up. It's likely an Earthquake, but I also really like our Shadow Dusknoir. There's a good chance that once we let this go, I think Shadow Dusknoir up a shield should be able to sweep most Pokemon that could be in the back. In comes an Aqua Tail. Opponent opts to let it go because they have no shields remaining. In comes our Shadow Dusknoir, and we just have to hope at this point that it is enough to win us this game. It is a Registeel as a final Pokemon here. Obviously, we have Dynamic Punch for this, but our opponent does have a catch available to them. We throw the move, though. No catch ends up happening, and we throw this before a potential Zap Cannon debuff. It nearly does enough to put them into a range where a Shadow Punch could knock them out here. As long as we don't see an attack drop, I should be able to knock them out here with our next charge move. Astonish damage is adding up. No debuff from that Zap Cannon. Shadow Punch might not be quite enough from this range to knock out, but it should be enough to put them into Astonish down range. No catch was on our opponent's side here, meaning that there is no way this Registeel will get to another move. We Astonish down. We can Astonish down the Shadow Gator. Our opponent top lefts. GG's to them. Next matchup, we're going to see our Lapras up against a Lickilicky. A huge core breaker, actually, depending on the moveset. If it has Shadow Ball, it's really, really bad for our Dusknoir. I mean, if it just has Earthquake, it's still pretty bad for Dusknoir. And if it does have Earthquake on this, it's even worse for our Shadow Drapion. And because they have Rollout, it's bad for our Lapras. With that said, Rollout is not as strong as it used to be. I'm just going to stay in here, try to soft lose this matchup, and make it so our backline doesn't have to deal with the Lickilicky. Earthquake has been shown, which is likely the worst case scenario. If it did have Shadow Ball, then it would likely mean that they don't have Earthquake, which means our Shadow Drapion would have a decent matchup into him. But I guess at this point, I'm just kind of glad they didn't go for a Solar Beam. That would have been kind of embarrassing getting one shot there. With that said, another Earthquake will be thrown. I think our Lapras is bulky enough to survive this and get off a third charge move. Earthquake does end up putting us pretty low, but now we can reach a charge move, either knocking them out or drawing a shield from this Lickilicky. In comes Sparkling Aria. Does our opponent shield up? They don't. We actually knock out the normal type Pokemon. A huge core breaker out of the way. In the back, going to be a Florges. I say swap or Shadow Drapion here. I try our best to spam out these charge moves. Let's see if they're going to shield or let this attack go. It's kind of interesting to me, though, that they're staying in this matchup likely implies that they are weak to our Shadow Drapion one way or another in the back. Trailblaze is going to bait us here. Trailblaze recently added into Florges' moveset, gives it the ability to ramp up its attack quite a bit here. I'm going to expect them not to double bait us here. If they do, that is a fantastic play, which is exactly what ends up happening. Now they can outpace us before that third Aqua Tail to a potential Moonblast. Aqua Tail number 1, though, is going to draw a shield if they want to keep this double boosted Florges alive. Aqua Tail number 2 is queued up. Does our opponent shield this? I would assume so. If you shield once, you kind of have to shield twice, and now they're going to be able to Moonblast my Shadow Drapion unless we catch the move here on our Lapras. At this point, I'm in a pretty good spot. I know I can farm this down with our Shadow Drapion and throw charge moves against whatever their final Pokemon is going to be. They're not going to reach a Moonblast against us, which is exactly what would lose us this game. In comes Drapion once again. Our opponent might actually reach a Trailblaze, though. Maybe I should have thrown a move against this. This is a little bit dicier than I'd like it to be. A +2 Trailblaze, despite being resisted, nearly knocks us out. In the back, going to be a Jellicent. So honestly, we need to get the second Crunch off, or we might lose this game. I doubt that Shadow Dusknoir would be able to survive if I get hit by a Shadow Ball. Luckily, I do survive the next Hex. I reach this next Crunch. Our opponent likely is going to be knocked out or put in range where a Hex could knock them out, or an Astonish rather, from our Dusknoir, and they end up getting knocked out there. GG's. Alright, next game, we're going to see a Golisopod. This Pokemon is obviously a decent matchup for Lapras, but not having Skull Bash means it is a little bit more awkward. Our opponent instantly throws an X-Scissor against us, and this won't do a ton of damage, but it will start chipping us down over time. Our side waves are adding up over them, or on them over time as well. We go for a Sparkling Aria, but our opponent makes a fantastic catch on a Giratina. This is not what we want to see, but depending on the fast move, either our Drapion or our Dusknoir could be a lot better into it. We build up a lot of energy, try to catch a move on our Drapion, but they don't end up throwing a charge attack until after they see what I bring in, likely meaning this is going to be a Dragon Claw. We have a lot of energy on our Lapras, we have a lot of energy on our Shadow Drapion, and Dragon Claws don't do too much to our own Drapion right now, so we can try our best to overfarm here, go for crunches, and try to knock this Pokemon out. If they try to shield or crunch at this point, I can reach another one before they can knock us out with the Giratina, but their switch clock is coming up in a very short manner here. We actually got a defense drop. Our opponent, though, makes yet another catch against us here. They are dancing around so much right now, making our life very difficult. Crunch does end up landing, getting a defense drop as well, and this might be a weird play to you guys, but I instantly come in with our Shadow Dusknoir. I know our team is a little bit soft to Pangoro, but at the very least, I resist the fighting type fast move pressure, and Night Slash does not one-shot us. After that defense drop with that Crunch as well, I think a Shadow Punch might just be enough to knock them out, especially with the Astonish damage that I'm getting right now. Night Slash does end up getting a shielded, but they ended up getting a boost from that, which is a little bit scary here. Shadow Punch being thrown, is it enough to knock out? It might not be enough, but I think that we can Astonish down if it is not before they reach another attack. In comes that Golisopod, and at this point, I just need to trip this Pokemon down. I have a lot of energy left over on our Lapras. I have some energy on our Shadow Drapion, and I want to get as much Astonish damage against this Pokemon as I can. In comes the next Shadow Punch. Our opponent opts to let it go. In comes Lapras. It has a Sparkling Aria, but I don't think I can reach a second one before another X-Scissor will be able to be reached against our Lapras, but they end up letting that go. I get a full Side Wave down. That Giratina in the backline is pretty healthy, but at this point, I can go for an Ice Beam and a Crunch against them. As long as I don't get knocked out before I reach the Ice Beam, I should be able to win this game. Our opponent doesn't even know our moveset as well, so maybe they think that I am hard-walled by this Giratina right now. Ice Beam being thrown. Do they know? They do not. They end up no-shielding. It's not quite enough to knock them out, but easily enough to put them into fast move farm down range for either our Shadow Dusknoir or, if we have to, our Shadow Drapion. Dragon Claw does knock us out here. One Astonish is all we need, and despite our opponent dancing around, they did not have quite enough to take us out there. GG's to them. Alright, next matchup, we're going to see Lapras in the lead up against a Shadow Drapion. This is a very neutral matchup. I'm kind of surprised, though, that they instantly swapped out to a Primeape. That likely means they're trying to bait something out here, likely an anti-fighter. If there's like a Cobalion in the back, this could be kind of bad, but if it's like a Virizion, we're still in a pretty good spot. Rage Fist does get thrown. It does a massive amount of damage to our Dusknoir, but because we are able to tank one, we can shield the second, go for a Shadow Punch here in just a second as well, and Dynamic Punch, despite not being stab, is a very powerful move that if we need to throw against that Drapion, we should be able to get a shield back. I undercharge this Shadow Punch just in case they no-shield, but they do shield it up, meaning that we can get to a second Shadow Punch before they're able to draw our second shield. If they shield this up, they can be my guest. At this point, I can farm them all the way down, reach a Dynamic Punch against that Shadow Drapion, and we should be in a pretty good spot. We can shield this up, as I said. They will not get to another Rage Fist before Astonish will knock them out. Our opponent is going to shield, but because we double shield ourselves, we get the full fast move down. In comes the Drapion, and in comes a Dynamic Punch. This obviously is not stab, it's not super effective, but it is a very powerful move. Our opponent opts to let it go, as they have no shields left, and they instantly throw an attack here against our Shadow Dusknoir. This Aqua Tail will knock us out. They will be able to either go for a Crunch against our Lapras, or potentially swap out depending on what they want to do here, and because I have a Drapion for this Virizion, I try to catch a Leaf Blade. We don't quite get it, but we should still be in a very good spot. We have a lot of energy on Lapras. They're going to have to use a ton of energy to knock us out, and despite not having any super effective charge moves, in fact, all of our charge moves are resisted, Drapion is still pretty good here. I can go for super effective Poison Stings, try to get debuffs, and just make it so Virizion is not going to be aligned into our Lapras. In comes yet another charge move. They've already shown Sacred Sword. Hopefully no Stone Edge coming through. If it was a Stone Edge, that might knock us out, but because it was not, they are forced to throw another charge attack before we end up getting the next Crunch. This will knock us out here, but now our Lapras with Ice Beam can easily knock this out potentially if we need to. Our opponent tries to make a catch here, but I have so much energy. It doesn't even matter if they would have caught. I go for the Sparkling Aria. This will knock out the Drapion, and at this point, Sideways plus Sparkling Aria would be enough for Virizion, but I also just have the Ice Beam. Might as well make use of it because I have it on the Pokemon. In comes Ice Beam. Our opponent with no shields remaining ends up getting knocked out. GG's to them. Alright, next matchup, it's going to be a Corviknight in the lead, a Pokemon which on PvPoke is ranked very highly in the Ultra League meta, but it's also a Pokemon you see very little of, mainly because it's a pretty hard Pokemon to get. You need a lot of XLs. I'm going to go straight for these Sparkling Arias. It's a very efficient move, and our opponent will no-shield that first attack. At this point, I know they can go for either Iron Head or a Sky Attack, or I guess potentially Payback. I would assume, though, either Sky Attack or Iron Head being thrown. Iron Head is going to be the move of choice from our opponent. I actually have no idea how this matchup plays out. I know I can outpace him to 3 charge moves, but resisted Psywave is doing very little to them. But to be fair, also these sand attacks, which are non-stab, are doing very little to us, so this is a very long and drawn-out matchup. Will my next Sparkling Aria be enough to knock out? I honestly have no idea. I'm going to throw it here, just try to knock this Pokemon out so our Shadow Drapion doesn't have to deal with this, and see what our opponent is going to do. We throw the move, they do survive on like 1 HP, which is a little bit unfortunate, but we are able to no-shield this, basically whittle this thing down so Drapion does not have to worry about it at all. Iron Head does knock us out, but now 1 Astonish later, our opponent gets knocked out. Alright, in the back, we're going to see a Zygarde, a Pokemon which is very bulky, and a Pokemon that our Shadow Drapion does want to avoid, but because they threw after 5, it likely is a crunch. Even if it's just a Bulldoze, though, this is going to do a ton of damage, saying we are a Shadow Dusknoir, and I have to shield just in case it is that super effective Dark type attack. It is unfortunately a Bulldoze, and our opponent does get that defense drop there, which means now the next Bulldoze will actually do quite a bit of damage against us. It's not what we wanted to see, but I think because they showed the Bulldoze, they likely do not have Crunch. I think I can still survive this next charge move, maybe even get off another Shadow Punch. If I can survive this, reach the Shadow Punch, and then outpace him to a crunch with our Shadow Drapion, then we might have a shield advantage Shadow Drapion in the back, hopefully in a good matchup. We've already seen a Steel type, we've seen a Ground type, hopefully whatever that final Pokemon is a matchup that Shadow Drapion can beat. I know this crunch is going to do about 25% of their HP. Is this enough? I see Impede on the Bulldoze. It needs to be enough if I want any chance of winning this game. But you go for crunch, it does knock them out, and in the back, thankfully, a little bit of a good matchup for our Shadow Drapion. We have crunches ready to go against this Malamar, and our opponent will try their best to go for Superpower, but it's not going to be enough here. It doesn't even do half of our HP here in Ultra League, and we have another crunch ready to go in just a second. Our opponent ends up top lefting. All right, next game here, Lapras into a Blastoise. This is not a great matchup for me. I'm going to swap into our Shadow Dusknoir and see what we can do. Our opponent stays in for just a second, but then they counter swap with a Malamar. I know in Great League, if you have this much of an energy lead, you can win the 2-shield as the Shadow Dusknoir, but here in Ultra League, I don't think it's quite as good for us because things are just a little bit bulkier. Foul Play as well, with this new pacing increase, will be able to be a much better matchup for Malamar into Shadow Dusknoir. We are going to try our best to go for this next Shadow Punch to get a shield back, but this is so tricky. I was thinking at this point, though, there's a chance this Blastoise is not even running Skull Bash. I've seen quite a few Blastoise Ice Beam my Virizions here in the past couple of days, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're running Water and Ice-type Charge Move Pressure, so I'm going to try our best to drain this energy on this Lapras, but because our opponent did so confidently bring back in their Blastoise, there is a chance it is still on Skull Bash. Yeah, unfortunately for us, it is going to be that Skull Bash charge move, which is not what we wanted to see here, but I'm going to try our best to chip this down with Lapras, at least bait a Skull Bash here. Let's see what they're going to do. Sparkling Aria comes through. Our opponent does obviously have that defense boost. We have another one ready to go, but because we've shown it already, there's no way they're ever going to shield this attack. I'm going to try to chip this down, but this Blastoise up a defense boost, maybe even up 2, and also up so much energy is going to be a very tricky Pokemon to take down. We still have Shadow Dusknoir with a bit of energy on it, but they have a Malamar. I have no idea what their third Pokemon is, and they have a shield advantage, so this game is looking pretty bad for us right now. I'm going to go for the Shadow Punch. Do they opt to shield this attack up, or will they just let their Blastoise go down? In comes the Shadow Punch. Our opponent does get knocked out, which is good to see, but in the back going to be a Clefable. Clefable is obviously not the worst Pokemon to see, but I don't think we can necessarily win this unless we make some nice catches here. I have Shadow Punch ready to go. No shield does come through from our opponent. We do quite a bit of Astonish damage. We try to catch a move. I don't think that a catch is really going to help us out too much here because a Moonblast is going to be thrown. Our opponent does throw it, obviously, and in comes a Malamar. We can go for an Aqua Tail, at least knock this Pokemon out, but because Clefable can likely overfarm to 2 back-to-back moves, either double Meteor Mash or Swift plus Moonblast, they will be able to knock out both my Drapion here as well as my Shadow Dusknoir. I go for this Aqua Tail. If I can reach another Aqua Tail before they're at 100 energy, there is a chance for us. Our Dusknoir, though, does not yet have a Shadow Punch. We are 1 Astonish away, and our opponent throws the charge move right at the last second. Very good counting by them. And now I just have to hope that they are not 1 fast move away from a charge move that can knock out Dusknoir. They throw a move. Maybe it's just a Swift here, but I think at this point it will be either a Meteor Mash or a Moonblast, which will knock us out. GG's to our opponent. Unfortunately for us, not able to pull that one out. All right, next matchup, Lapras up against a Shadow Drapion. Very neutral matchup here. Last time we were in this matchup, our opponent actually instantly swapped out, but this time our opponent is staying in, so we'll get to see how this matchup plays out over time. I think as long as we don't get debuffed on the first crunch, this matchup's actually pretty good for Lapras. We don't see a debuff, which is fantastic. It means this next crunch is nowhere close to knocking us out. We can go for the Sparkling Arias and 2-shot them very easily. Psywave might be resisted here, but it's a very powerful move, which is meaning it's still doing quite a bit of fast move damage to them. In comes another crunch, and at this point we can survive pretty easily, go for another Sparkling Aria, and try our best to knock them out. They end up coming with a Shadow, or a Dragon Breath rather, Giratina, which we go for an Ice Beam against. This move, if it draws a shield, will make it so our Shadow Dusknoir should be in a pretty good spot to go for Astonish as well as these Shadow Punches to try to knock them out. In comes a charge move, it could be a Shadow Sneak. I'm going to respect it because even a Dragon Claw, honestly, would do quite a bit of damage. These Dragon Breaths are adding up against us, and I know that Shadow Dusknoir up so much energy is a very tricky Pokemon to deal with. In comes another charge move, obviously another Dragon Claw going to be thrown, but our opponent at this point is going to be in range where Shadow Punch will knock out. I am at 100 energy, so we are one Astonish away from 2 more Shadow Punches. In comes our first Shadow Punch, our opponent does let it go. In comes what to try to farm us down? A Malamar. I go for a Dynamic Punch. This move in neutral scenarios is a more efficient attack, despite being non-stab, because I've said so many times, it is such a strong move. Now, after landing that attack, this Shadow Punch is going to start threatening HP. They're going to have to shield something this game, but is it going to be a Shadow Punch? It is, which means now we can bring in our Shadow Drapion, go for a crunch against this, and try to Aqua Tail their Shadow Drapion. At this point, their best win condition is going to be a catch, but even if they get it, that means their Drapion is not going to be able to get to another charge move. Superpower does do quite a bit of damage, and they do make a fantastic catch, but crunch at this point will be almost enough to knock them out, and we can go for a full Poison Sting down to knock out the Malamar here after the fact with our energy. We have an Aqua Tail ready to go. This should be enough at this point to knock out or come very close to knocking out this Malamar, and we can fast move them down if they do survive with all 3 of our Pokemon remaining. Not even close. GG's to our opponent. With that 3-2 set here, it's going to set us up for a potential veteran push. We are in 4-1 territory. Can we get it? Let's see. Game number 1 of our final set here. We're going to see Talonflame in the lead up against our Lapras. This is a very neutral matchup. Obviously, we are a water type into a fire type, but because Lapras doesn't have a lot of water type fast move pressure, it is a little bit dicier than you might expect. Our opponent, though, safe swaps a Cresselia. I bring it in our Dusknoir. I'm going to shield expecting a Future Sight. Our opponent does have the big move. Maybe I should have brought in our Shadow Drapion here, honestly, but I figured that our Drapion would be a little bit better in the backline, saying it is so much better into that Talonflame later on, and I know Cresselia doesn't really want to face an Astonished user as well. We're going to go now for this next Shadow Punch. Our opponent would have to shield this up if they don't want to lose all of this energy. They do end up letting it go, which is fine by me. This Talonflame is by no means an answer to Shadow Dusknoir, and because we have so much energy here, I'm going to just swap out and come back in with our Lapras. I know this could be a risky play depending on the final Pokemon here, but I think that our energy on Shadow Dusknoir is just so useful, might as well keep it just in case we need it. We end up baiting out a Virizion of all things, a Pokemon which is not that scary for a Psywave and Ice Beam using Pokemon. Leaf Blade obviously is super effective, but we can survive it, go for an Ice Beam, and either draw a shield or do a critical amount of damage to this Virizion. In comes Ice Beam, our opponent opts to let it go, which is exactly what we want to see. Now we can go for a nice farm down, either with our Dusknoir or our Drapion, or potentially just draw both shields with our Shadow Dusknoir. In comes the first Shadow Punch here. Our opponent does let it go. They're banking everything right now on their Talonflame, interestingly enough. We have almost 2 Shadow Punches ready to go here. I'm going to shield up the first charge move. Hopefully no Flame Charge. No, it is a Fly, which means that now we can go for one more Astonish, go for the Shadow Punch, one Astonish next, and then go for yet another Shadow Punch because of how much energy we have here. They're in range where we can maybe even farm them down if they go for a Brave Bird against their Shadow Drapion. So all I need to do now is swap out, go into our Shadow Drapion, try to reach an Aqua Tail, or if we do somehow get knocked out, Astonish down later on. I know this is Ultra League. Even if they did have Brave Bird, it wouldn't one-shot us here. Their best course of action is trying to land Double Fly to knock us out, but they're not quite at the energy yet. Shadow Drapion is just a little bit too spammy here. Aqua Tail coming through our opponent, not having much wiggle room here. Aqua Tail knocks them out, taking us the win in this game. All right, next matchup, Lapras in the lead up against another Zygarde. Fantastic lead matchup if they end up no-shielding the Ice Beam. Let's see if this trainer is going to expect it or if they're once again going to no-shield. Our opponent is over-farming here, at least past the Crunch or the Bulldoze, likely at least baiting an Earthquake or an Outrage. Ice Beam being thrown. Our opponent this time does end up shielding. With that said, I'm not that worried about the Zygarde, right? I've already got a shield. I can survive whatever move they're going to throw here, get another Ice Beam off, getting either 2 shields or getting a critical amount of damage, and we call a Crunch bait. I didn't even try to call that. I figured they'd go for a big move one way or another there, but calling that Crunch is so pivotal. It means that now this Ice Beam is going to do a ton of damage against them and make it so this Zygarde is in a very tricky spot. I know I could shield this and go for a full Psywave down, but I could also just be really annoying to our opponent, make them throw the Earthquake, and then go for a full Poison Sting down. Might as well, right? I figure this energy is going to be pretty useful in the backline. Our opponent brings in a Gastrodon of all things. Not exactly a surprise. I've seen Double Ground quite a bit in Ultra League, but Crunch is going to do a lot of damage, and we have a shield advantage Shadow Dusknoir, which in general is a very strong pick. A Fortress in the backline, so a very tricky team here for our Shadow Drapion, but Dusknoir up shields and up energy should be able to deal with this. Shadow Punch coming through does draw that first shield. Our opponent almost certainly is now going to go for a Rock Tomb to debuff our attack stat. That's fine though. Rock Tomb is a decent move, but we can outpace them here to Shadow Punch because of how quick Shadow Dusknoir is and because of our shield advantage. In comes our next Shadow Punch. Our opponent will have no shields to hide behind. I can go for some more Astonishes and try our best to build up even more energy. At this point, I would almost expect them to swap back into Gastrodon, so if they do, interestingly enough, I think would come back in with our Shadow Drapion, because if I do that, I could actually clear our debuffs and go for a non-debuff Shadow Punch later on, but they didn't do that. They actually just stayed in with Fortress, and because of that, I'll just knock them out here. Still clear my debuff because I have so much energy on a Shadow Drapion that I can get off, that if they don't throw energy against us, I can just go for a couple crunches and an Aqua Tail to knock them out, and just by landing this crunch here, they're going to be in Shadow Punch range. We win CMP, so our Shadow Dusknoir in the backline should be able to win us this game, especially if they don't realize I can reach an Aqua Tail after 3 more Poison Stings. In comes the Aqua Tail. Our opponent has no more HP remaining. We get the win with a team that just triple hard countered our Shadow Drapion. All right, next game here. Honestly, this matchup you'd expect to be a very good matchup because we're an Ice type into a Dragon and Flying type Pokemon, right? But Dragon Breath is a very strong move. Psywave is non-stab, and if we want to reach an Ice type charge move, we actually have to go for a very expensive move with Ice Beam, whereas they have Superpower, they have Dragon Claw as well. Our Sparkling Aria bait would be very bad, and they end up shielding and then coming in with a Fortress, or we ended up shielding their move rather, and then they swapped out. I think they went for a Dragon Claw with their Dragonite, which is kind of interesting if they're going to swap out anyway, but because we are seeing the Fortress here, we're not in that bad of a spot. I know we had to no-shield that move, which means that now we're debuffed and we're pretty low on HP, but we just need to whittle down this Fortress a bit more to make sure our backline is not quite as in trouble. Shadow Punch number 2 coming through. Does our opponent shield this up? We have a lot of energy on Lapras, so I kind of do want to see a shield here. We do get a shield, which is fantastic to see. Our opponent now throwing a second charge attack, and now all I need to do is come back in Lapras, go for a Sparkling Aria, knock this Pokemon out, and try to use this energy lead to our advantage. First charge move coming through. Does our opponent shield this attack up, or are they going to be content letting their Fortress go? Fortunately, they do let it go, meaning that our Drapion no longer has to deal with it in the back. I see that Shadow Dragonite come in. I instantly throw the Ice Beam. Do they expect me to have this? They don't. We get the one shot here in the backline. Going to be a Golisopod, a Pokemon, which is a little bit awkward, but by no means a Pokemon that we can't take down. We have Sparkling Aria. They know our moveset. They will almost certainly no-shield this attack, but if they no-shield too much damage here, then I'm just going to fast move them all the way down. In comes Sparkling Aria. It almost puts them below half HP. After the Sideways, they are into the yellow health at this point, and this X-Scissor might not knock us out. In comes the move. We do survive. Lapras is just a little bit too bulky here. I go for the Sparkling Aria. If they shield this, I can reach a move with Drapion. If they no shield, I think I just fast move them down at this point, and we should be able to win this game. I know that 2 Aqua Jets don't knock us out from full HP as well, so we should be able to no shield pretty comfortably. They would need 4 charge moves to knock out our Shadow Drapion, and they are not going to reach that before a full Poison Sting down is going to come through. All right, next game here, we're going to see Lapras in the lead up against a Shadow Drapion. This is a match we've seen a couple of times today. If they get the debuff early on, it can be a little bit awkward, but if they don't get the debuff, then this is a very good matchup for Lapras. In comes a charge move, likely a crunch being thrown instantly here. In comes that charge move, and they do get the debuff this time. Not exactly what we want to see, but we can still win the Zero Shield matchup, go for the Sparkling Arias, and make it so this Dark-type Pokemon is not going to be as big of a concern for our Shadow Dusknoir. In comes another charge move here from our opponent. Actually, no, they let us throw first, which is a little bit scary, actually. They have a ton of energy on this Pokemon. What are they planning? Sparkling Aria does draw that shield there in the red. I go for a catch here. Did we get a crunch, or did they go for an Aqua Tail? We just have to wait and see. If it's a crunch, that's a lot of energy down the drain, which is exactly what we end up seeing here. In comes yet another charge move. We're going to go for a bit of an overfarm here, try to get energy for the backline and see what they're going to have. Aqua Tail does a decent amount of our HP. We go for a CMP tie. I thought I'd win it, but unfortunately, they have a bit more attack than I do, meaning that now our Drapion is going to be way lower than it has any right to be. I wish I had that much extra HP on our Drapion, but at this point, we are going to try our best with our Shadow Dusknoir up shields to win this game. In the back, unfortunately, is a Clefable. I wish I could have got that Aqua Tail off to put them into Shadow Punch range, but they get a perfect farm down, and we are going to try now to go for Shadow Punches to knock out this Clefable. They go for a charge move, hopefully not a Swift Bait. That would be really annoying. Our opponent throwing a charge move. It is a Swift Bait, actually. A crazy move. That makes me think, though, that they are pretty desperate to get rid of Dusknoir. I'm going to double shield here, expecting yet another Moonblast. Our opponent, though, goes for a double Swift Bait, so the 2 shields that I had access to this game, I used on Swifts against our Shadow Dusknoir. That is very bad. In comes the Shadow Punch. Our opponent does instantly throw the Moonblast, so at least I make one play correct here. If our opponent is weak to Shadow Dusknoir in the back, there is still a chance for us to win this one. Moonblast knocks us out, but in the back is just a Malamar. That is not weak to us. We end up losing. GG's to them. Good baits. Next matchup going to be yet another Zygarde. How many Zygardes are we going to see today? With that said, I'm happy to see it with our Lapras. We have Ice Beam, obviously. We've seen just how much damage it can do here. Ice Beam being thrown, our opponent could shield us up if they want to, but we've seen no matter what they do, it's not a good matchup for them. Ice Beam does end up landing. Our opponent now will likely try to reach a big charge attack, either an Outrage or an Earthquake. I don't think they're going to go for bait here, so I think this time I will shield up, try to go for a farm down if we can, and our opponent, realizing that they're in a bad spot, swaps out to a Lickilicky. We've seen this matchup before, though. It's a very tricky Pokemon to face. I don't want this anywhere near our backline. This next Sparkling Aria is not going to do much to them, but I have another one ready to go right after the fact, and if I can reach a third charge move before getting knocked out, we might be in a bit of a better spot. We actually get a shield here, which is kind of interesting. Our opponent thinking that Lapras might be a bit of a concern for them in the backline. I'm going to no shield. Let's see what charge move they're going to throw. At the very least, we can see what their charge move set is going to be. Shadow Ball being thrown might mean they're not on Earthquake, potentially. I go for the Ice Beam this time, get a bit more raw damage against them, and that might have been a CMP, and if it was, that could be a very good sign for us here. In comes a charge move. What is it going to be? Earthquake, maybe Shadow Ball, maybe Body Slam. It is going to be a Body Slam. We survived because they undercharged, realizing that they CMP'd us. They come in with a Gastrodon into our Shadow Drapion safe swap, and this game is going to be a little bit more awkward than it could have been. With that said, I could not have given that Lickilicky a farm down. That would have been catastrophic. In comes our first crunch. It doesn't quite do enough to two-shot. We don't get a debuff. This next crunch coming through. Does our opponent shield this attack up? They kind of have to at this point, or else they're going to be in range where I get the knockout just with fast moves for the rest of this match. And because I got that shield, I feel like there is still a chance for us this match. With that said, Shadow Dusknoir is going to have a lot of work to do. Unfortunately, they don't knock us out, meaning they get one extra Mud Slap of damage and energy against our Shadow Drapion. In comes a charge move, almost certainly going to be an Earth Power opponent, though does have that Lickilicky, meaning that if I shield this up, I have to be very wary of a potential Shadow Ball here. I'm going to catch the move on Lapras, and at this point, as long as this is a Shadow Ball, this should secure us this game. In comes the charge move. Shadow Ball was properly caught on our Lapras, and now we can go for a Shadow Punch to knock out this Lickilicky. This is looking very good for us. They do have that Zygarde still around, so they might use that as a catch later on. They still have that Gastrodon, which is pretty healthy as well. What are they going to do? They actually instantly bring in Zygarde. I'm thinking at this point, I can just go for a full farm down, go for a Dynamic Punch against this Gastrodon, and out of nowhere, Shadow Dusknoir sweeping this endgame, and that should do it. That should secure us veteran here this season in the Go Battle League. Shadow Dusknoir putting in overtime to get that for us. Let's just make sure a 4-1. I need 32 points. Is it enough? We get all the way up to 2509, which is definitely enough for veteran here. I'm very happy this team was able to work. It wasn't the easiest team to use, all things considered, because Lapras honestly does have a lot of things that ends up beating it here in this meta, but Shadow Dusknoir is such a fun Pokemon, Shadow Drapion as well. It's hard to go wrong with it. So, this team was very fun. I'm not sure how strong it is really, but it was a lot of good research to see how Lapras can do in the Go Battle League, and very fun to Ice Beam those dragons. All right, well, thank you so much for watching today's video. If you want to see more battles like this on the channel, I am going to be uploading a ton more, so please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And thank you again for watching. Take care. I'll see you in the next one.